Hello and welcome to the Film Ireland podcast. I'm Gemma Creagh and I'm chatting with Yousef Srouji about his wonderful documentary, Three Promises, which screens at Docs Ireland Festival on Wednesday the 19th of June. Yes, so thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.
It's a beautiful, very personal film and like a gorgeous first time feature. Can you tell me a little bit about your background in film that brought you here?
Yeah, I have none. I call myself an accidental filmmaker. I studied economics and I studied international development. And I came across the footage that my mom filmed that the film is based on about 6 years ago now. And as soon as I saw that film, I felt an obligation to make a documentary. I do come from a family of artists, and I have always been passionate about film, but yeah, it kind of just happened.
So, baptism by fire then in compiling. Was it difficult to look back over all those moments because you really feel the intensity of the emotion as you're watching the film?
Yeah, it was extremely difficult, and I went through multiple phases. I mean, the my initial reaction was, wow, like this needs to be shared. And then after working on it for the first few months, it was extremely difficult because I was working on it alone and I was translating it and subtitling it into English so that my producer Marielle can understand and help me with it. Um, and then that time period, it was very difficult watching it. It would, I would have, start feeling overwhelmed. I would cry. It was validating a lot of my memories about that time period that I had started to question whether they were real or not. So it really brought back a lot of emotions. But then after that initial phase, I started seeing the beauty and the family dynamics and the different characters. And then lastly, I completely dissociated. After, a couple of years of working with the footage, I started talking about the characters in the film as if they're not me and my family. I became a director. Yeah, at that point.
Did you know this would cut? Like, was this something when you looked back over? Was this something you knew it would cut together to create such a solid piece of film, or was it something that you just felt you wanted to package it and then realized that it was, like such a cohesive piece of art in itself?
Yeah, definitely the second thing. When I first started working, my producer Marielle asked me like, "What do you want to do with this?" I'm like, "I just want to compile it, make sense of it, and put it on YouTube. Like, just make it public." Because I thought it was good for the world to see. But we had initially applied because she has a background in filmmaking, so she knew more of the value of what we were looking at. So we had applied to a SF Film Catapult fellowship for first-time documentary filmmakers, and we got accepted. And then, okay, that was like a signal that, okay, maybe there's more to this than I had initially thought. And then the ball kept rolling from there.
And how did your family feel about being featured in the film? Like initially going for to YouTube.
Yeah, I mean, my mom at first, so after we got accepted into this fellowship, and I called her and I'm like, "Hey, mom, like this is real, this is happening." She's like, "Oh, I thought you were joking. Like I didn't know you actually were gonna make a film out of this." So I sat her down and we had a conversation about it, and she eventually told me that the reason she was filming was that she would hope one day to share the story with the world. And I told her, I'm like, that day has come. And she wasn't very comfortable with the idea, but she was okay with it. She felt scared that she would come off as a bad mother. She had some guilt. Yeah, I comforted her and I made sure that she knows that that's not the case. And people love her today. She's the most popular person in the festivals that we've been to. Um, my father was he was okay with it from the beginning, but he's also gotten used to taking a back seat behind my mom. So he's like, I could tell he's like, why am I not featured more in it? But he doesn't say anything. He gets it. My mom is a is a big enough character, and my sister, she was okay with me taking it. She's an artist in her own right, but she refused to work on it with me because she didn't want to revisit that part of her life. She only watched the final cut like a week before we premiered.
Wow. And was that difficult for her, do you think, to go back? Because I mean, that was your experience with the footage.
Yeah, it was, we had our own healing journeys, me and my sister separately. Hers was a lot different than mine, and I think it becomes obvious from the film itself how my sister is reacting to what's happening versus how I'm reacting to what's happening. And it was extremely difficult for her rewatching it, and I had to comfort her. But I think it also shed some light on her relationship with my mom, and I think that was for the better in the long
Yeah.
term. Yeah,
That's lovely. God, it's so it's such a, it is one of the things I think as creatives that's our inspiration. It's just so unfortunate how timely it is and how horrible it is to show that lived reality that like so many people now are still in the midst of, and you're back. Then did you think was that the natural conclusion for you in the film? Was that a decision that you made during the course of working with the footage?
I had two red lines when I was working from the footage from the beginning. One was a "Don't ask me where are they now" type of thing. You know, I was trying to avoid that as much as possible because I didn't want it to be a story about me and my family. I wanted me and my family to be a representation of something that's bigger than us, you know? And we are a privileged family. So, you know, I didn't want to get too much into that. The other red line was I didn't want to add too much politics and make a historical documentary about like what happened and why the second intifada started and why this was happening. I wanted it to be as raw and in the moment as possible. I think the ending, you know, we just had a title card that said that me and Dima decided to move back. And I think it made sense to add that because of that last conversation in the film about intergenerational trauma and things like that. And to me, the reason I moved back was partially to continue my healing journey, you know? So it made sense to add that for me. Yeah.
And
And
your mum, is she like she's still displaced? She's still like, would she go back and visit you or would you go to visit her?
yeah, so we had initially moved to Qatar in 2003. My parents are currently in Cairo in Egypt. They do regularly come visit though. Yeah, and we've always came to visit. I mean, we would come. One of the reasons we moved to Qatar and not somewhere in the West, like the US, or because my mom wanted to stay close and wanted it to be relatively affordable to come visit. So we would come, you know, we'd come in the summer, we would come for Christmas every year, like nearly every year. So we maintained that connection throughout. And my decision to move back was, you know, an outcome of that because I always felt disconnected everywhere else that I lived, you know, and I wanted to feel at home.
Yeah. And there is, I think there's such a what's so beautiful about this is exactly what you said. It's not about the politics. It's very much so a personal journey and a family and the fear that's there. Have you did you show it to many people from the area and like would it be something that, you kind of is cathartic to watch together?
Yeah, I still haven't, we still haven't done like an official premiere in Palestine. Um, but we have shown it in some Arab countries. Prior to premiering it last year, I did hold a private screening in my house here in Palestine, and I invited some friends, I invited some artists, some filmmakers that I know, and I just wanted their feedback, and I wanted to see their reaction on the cut. And uh, it was a beautiful experience, to be honest. We were about like 20, 30 people, and at the end, people were either laughing or crying, and people broke out into like their own conversations and were revisiting their memories and we're talking about things, and I found that to be beautiful. So I thought that was a green flag for me, that I did a good job in representing our story, at least as a Palestinians.
You do, you capture, I think, the humanity that there's such love in the family and you can just feel it when you're watching the film and there's such humanity, do you know, like everyone that in that love that it's like it's such a interesting choice to not go into the politics behind it. Even like at one point when your mother mentions like I'll talk about it when I put down the camera.
Yeah.
It's very
Yeah.
long. You
Yeah.
know,
I thought
like
that
even
was enough. Yeah.
that's being brought up, and that's very definitely handled. Did have you noticed what have reactions been when you're screening with it?
Yeah. It's been an experience. I mean, we premiered before October 7th. We premiered in March, April 2023, and the feedback was overwhelmingly beautiful then. And we would get a lot of I would get a lot of questions about my mom, about you know why she was filming and things like that. And it was nice to see support and from different parts of the world. So we premiered in Switzerland, and we played it in Sweden, and we went to the US, and there was support. But then after October 7th, it completely shifted. It's become insanely supportive. It's unrealistic, like unreal. Like I was and we had a screening in New York that was sold out for 3 days. We in Amsterdam we had great support, and True False Film Festival I felt like a celebrity. It was a bit too much for me because I was still processing what's going on, because and I'm getting these you know middle America, white Americans living in Missouri, who are coming to watch my film wearing the keffiyeh, and know their history. And I'm walking around this small town, and everybody just is like, "Thank you for sharing. This means so much." And they're all so pro-Palestinian, and that was something I never even imagined before, especially in Middle America. You know, um, I'm still processing that. I'm still processing that. Yeah, been a
It's
lot.
good. Yeah, it's
You
good.
know,
It's good to feel the love back from the community. And I think one of like at one point when your dad says, like, why are you still filming? Like, why? Do you know? And you're like, that's the answer, to share the message and again, like really to hammer home, this is the lived experience of children and they're terrified and
yeah,
everyone is still terrified. And I think that's very hard to see, but I think like you can't argue with this. Like you can say, oh, there's two sides to this particular story. Like, like all those arguments just don't work. You can't go why. You just go, these are innocent children that are terrified and traumatized the
but
way their parents have been traumatized. And that's very clear. Um, was there a different version of this as you were editing it? Did you like think about going, like you said, okay, well, I'm not going into the politics of it, but was there, like a different kind of slant on the way you wanted to tell it at any point?
it was longer. It was about an hour and a half. It's currently at 60 minutes, so it was about 90 minutes initially, and it included more modern day footage of me interviewing my mom and talking to my mom. But we ultimately decided to cut that and keep it as raw as possible to the archival footage. And that was a decision that I had made early on, but then as things progressed, I decided to add modern footage, and then eventually, things came back full circle. I'm like, so we'll stick to the original vision, and I think that was a good decision. I mean, luckily, I had a great editor, and my producer Marielle, and my editor Mahdot, who were fantastic, to be honest, and um, they understood the vision from the beginning and were very supportive in bringing that to reality. I mean, it wouldn't be the success that it is today without them.
And talk to me about that relationship. So when you had your producer on board, like did you and you were saying that you spent a lot of time with the footage yourself. Did you put together the first rough cut to show
Yeah,
her to get her on board? And then when did the editor come on board?
yeah. So me and my producer were actually doing a master's program together, so we were friends. And she was initially asking me questions about my time. She grew up in a very pro-Palestinian family in New York, um, so she was excited to like get the first person perspective from me, and that triggered me to go and ask my parents about that time, which then led to me finding the footage. So even so, without her existence, I probably wouldn't have found the footage. Um, but yeah, as you said, I began working. I did a rough assembly alone, and then together we did a rough cut. We sent it to my mother with a few questions and some steps on how to record herself, and she sent back 2 hours of narration of storytelling. So then we had to go repeat the process with that, um, translate my mom's narration. We I figured out the three promises structure from that initial um, 2 hours that she sent. And so we put that together and we're like, okay, now we need someone who knows how to cut this because I'm not an editor, Mariel's not an editor. So we first looked at Palestinian editors and Rabab Haji Yahya, who's a well-known Palestinian editor and filmmaker. He recommended Mahdut for us. And it, she recommended Mahdut amongst a few others. And the day I had that conversation with Mahdut, we immediately clicked. I mean, it was like I was talking to my sister. And so well, got her on board. She knew exactly what to do. And then I would sit down with my mom multiple times and re-record some things and you know, fix it here and there and put it all together. And that was, I would say, 2 or 3 years after I found the footage. Yeah. Granted, COVID was one of those years, so that was a dead year. But yeah.
Yeah. And tell me about the actual then the post production and the polish at the end. Was there much changed in terms of the sound mix or anything? Like is everything kind of as is, or did you tweak things around to kind of make them smoother?
Um, we had okay. So first, the color was there's no change in the color like whatsoever. Just a bit of lightening it because it was extremely dark footage. Um, in terms of sound, we had a composer come on, Ria Rushdat, who did the bass sound, the piano and the oud and those things. And then my editor Mahdot also threw in some of her own music on there. Uh, but the actual audio from the footage is as it was. Um, there's a very, very little tweaking. I mean, obviously, you know, some transitions were done, you know, extending some things. When we cut the video off, we extend the audio a little bit just to have a smooth transition. But there is no, we like to keep it as raw as possible. You know,
And was there anything that surprised you in the footage when you looked back over it and through it? Was there anything that you didn't expect to see or that you understood differently?
I mean, that was more so the case with my mom's narration than it was the footage. The footage was beautiful because it, like I said earlier, it validated memories that I was beginning to question if they were real or not. I was like, okay, no, they're real. Like, yeah, that's exactly how I remember it. Like, okay, this makes sense. To me, the most heartbreaking moment for me personally was how my mom described me in that moment where she thinks that I lost my childhood, and she described me visually as just having two big round circles for eyes that were like empty black holes, like soulless eyes. And that was something that when I was on my healing journey and I went through depression in my late teens, and that's how I used to see myself when I would look in the mirror. So then, and I never really spoke about my mom about this, but then so like years later, to hear my mom describe me the same way that I saw myself in my darkest moments was really painful but beautiful and at the same time.
That she really saw you.
Yeah.
And that must be horrible to experience as a mother to have to watch that. Did
Mhm.
you like would you be a lot more open after this with like in those discussions? Like has it cracked open or is it something that you've processed and the line has been drawn in the sand?
Yeah, I tend to not talk about myself too much to my mom because I feel like she doesn't need to know more than what she already knows. Um, but it has opened up a lot the other way around, where I now understand my mom. I think my sister also now understands my mom on a much deeper level, and it helped humanize my mom. My mom was always like a superhero to us, like this crazy, you know, super energetic, successful, strong woman. And now it's like, oh, she's a human too. And, she has her insecurities and she has her fears, but she is still an amazing person, an amazing mother.
Beautiful. And it is, it's sort of a testament to to the family, to your relationships and
Yeah.
how warm like it is in the midst of all that terror. Do you know, like in the midst of all that fear and pain and loss and violence. I think that's why it's it's an easier documentary to watch because that's the focus. You know, you're kind of you're abroad on that journey and you do feel on edge the whole time, but because that warmth is at the core of it, as a viewer, you don't come out of it going, "Oh my God, I'm exhausted." Like,
Yeah. Well, I'm glad to hear that that's how it feels. Yeah. And I would like to give a lot of credit for my dad for that as well, because my dad was a calming presence in the family. Uh, and he does have a lot of warmth and kindness to him. And yeah, he would read he would read Harry Potter to me and my sister when we were hiding under the stairs or in the basement, and he would translate every sentence of Arabic and then English, and that's how I learned English. I didn't know how to speak English until so you know, and the dynamic between my mom and my dad. I mean, my mom is also a very loving person, but she's has a lot more energy and she wants to do her own method of resisting and go and film this and but then my dad gives that counterweight. I think having both of those characters in the family really created that uh, a unique experience for me and my sister, a beautiful one.
and if there's any kind of what takeaway would you like, say, people to come out of when they've watched the film? What would you hope that they kind of come out of it thinking or feeling?
And the goal from the beginning was to humanize not just Palestinians, but any family living in a war zone anywhere in the world. And when we talk numbers, 30,000, 35,000 people dead in Gaza. I don't know how many in Ukraine and in Syria and Iraq and Libya and Sudan, wherever there's a war zone. Behind every one of those numbers is a family like this. Maybe a little different, maybe a little more conservative, maybe a little whiter, maybe whatever it is, but it's still a family and they still have a family dynamic that I imagine is similar to ours. And I think that's extremely important to keep in mind, especially when we're overwhelmed by these stats and videos and numbers and eventually disconnect us, right? I think it's extremely important to not get disconnected.
And how are you feeling? Like how do you feel kind of coming out of this? Is this, I mean, this is again, it's something that really touches people and will make a difference. But how, like, do you feel, how do you not feel like overwhelmed every day at the,
I have not processed it yet. A complete honesty. I mean, it's been a year since we premiered,
yeah.
and it feels like I was telling my friends this the other day. When I remember the festivals that I visited or the conversations that I have, I remember them as if I'm watching someone else doing it. So there's a level of dissociation happening, and I just haven't taken the time to process it. I'm not avoiding processing it. I just don't even know how to begin. And especially with everything that's going on today, I am extremely overwhelmed. But my defense mechanism is to just kind of let it. It has a life of its own. This film has a life of its own. Let it do it. I'll support it when it needs my support, and then my time deal with my emotions will come when the time is right. Yeah.
Are you, do you have plans to work on anything else now? Is this your, like, this is so personal. Would you like to look at a different subject from a different perspective?
No plans to work on another film, if I'm being completely honest. I would like to in the future. Yeah. There's a lot of stories from my grandparents that I would like to turn into films. But I'm currently back to my day job. I'm back to being a development economist and working in Palestine and trying to make change on the ground rather than, uh, share our story with the world. So my focus is on that. My energy is focused on that for the time being, and we'll see. We'll see what happens down the line.
Well, we're all hoping for change, and we're
Yeah.
all hoping for peace. Your thoughts are definitely with everyone. I do not know one person in this whole country personally. I'm sure they're there, but I don't. I haven't come across any that aren't with you, I think. And thank you for sharing this. It's really beautiful to watch.
Thank you, and thank you for having me. And just, we in Palestine have always considered the Irish to be like our brothers and sisters. We've had your support before it was popular. I think growing up, I knew people who had refugee papers who weren't allowed to travel anywhere. Not even so, people who had refugee paperwork from Egypt in Palestine, and then they're not allowed to visit Egypt, even though the paper is from Egypt, but they're allowed to go to Ireland. You know, so and it's something that we grew up around. The Irish have always been supportive with us one way or another, and so we do. We love that, and thank you for that.
And I'm sure like there's probably no need for this, I'd say, in terms of covering it, because I'd say you'll have plenty of bums and seats in Docs Ireland Festival. That's a fantastic festival. So thank you so much. And it was really lovely to talk to you.
You as well.
And thank you for listening. So you can get tickets to this screening and much, much more on docsireland.ie, and check out our own site, filmireland.ie, where you can subscribe to our newsletter and never miss another podcast.